Well, you know what judgment is. Do you understand what the idea of judgment is?
For me, it means prejudice or prejudgment.
Well, you know, it's really choosing what you prefer. You choose what you prefer and let everyone else have the right to live the way they want to, knowing that the way they live has nothing to do with the way you choose to live. It will not affect you if it is not what you prefer. Preference is not judgment. Judgment is invalidating everything you don't prefer. When you invalidate something, you become equal to it, and thus what you do not want, you become. Okay? And then that's really what's behind the phrase, judge not and you shall not be judged.
Right.
Okay? It means that essentially you become what you hate. So,
haven't you seen that happen to people and institutions? And isn't that an interesting paradox of human dynamics?
People are culturally conditioned to it. I mean, if you go into the educational system, which is another entire issue on a cultural level, you'll see all the little ego games and all the stuff that children are encouraged to play. And you know, it's no wonder that some people have a hard time in this kind of system, which is entirely an artificially and synthetically created disaster for trying to evolve in this system. And that's why from another interesting and rather amusing aspect, is so desirable, because it puts out so much challenge.
Contrary to the Prime Minister's unbelievably reckless accusations, I have not been paid and will not be paid a single penny for my travel here or my participation in this event or for any of the reporting that I'm doing here. Now, what I think is really interesting, and I think it's important to think about this, is a lot of times people who make accusations about other people's hidden corrupt motives are actually saying very little about the people they're accusing, but saying a great deal about themselves. Yes. Because what those people are saying, the people who spew those kind of accusations, is, I cannot believe that anybody would do anything out of a sense of duty or principle. They must be doing it for some corrupt reason. And the reason they think that is because they themselves never do anything out of conviction or principle. And so they believe that everybody else is plagued by the same pathology of soullessness that plagues them.
Where can we go from here? Man does not have rights. He has responsibilities. Doesn't have a right for freedom. You have a responsibility to be free. You have to earn it. It is not going to be like the rapture where God comes down and hands you a free gift. You've got to do the work. And if you don't do the work, you're lost. And that's what all saints in history have said. The importance of meditation and training the mind. The importance of training the body. The importance of training your appetites. You must start to begin to see this on a larger level of perspective, like witnessing, where you can watch your behavior and watch your choices and why you're making those choices. And with these rules, you can start to begin to maybe do something about it.
In order to answer this question, what is a healthy diet, we turn to the pioneer of nutrition research, Dr. Weston Price. Dr. Price was a dentist, actually. His practice was in Cleveland, Ohio. He was a very successful dentist for his day. And he had a lot of patients who asked him, what is a healthy diet? How can I be healthier? And Dr. Price did not know the answer to this question. What he did know is that he was seeing increasing levels of disease among his patients. Dental caries, cavities, infection in the mouth, and also what he referred to as dental deformities. We have a different way of saying that. We say crooked teeth, crowded teeth. But he was seeing all sorts of problems in the development of the jaw and the teeth. And what he noticed and what he observed was that people who had poor dental health, people who had cavities, who had infection, people who had crowded and crooked teeth and overbites, generally had poor overall health. The teeth were a mirror to the rest of the body. And he was concerned because it seemed like the health of the American population was deteriorating and getting worse and worse, at least based on what he was seeing in his practice. Now, this was a time back in the 30s, or actually this was the early 20s when he started his practice, when the world was opening up. There were sections of the globe that had been discovered and isolated populations described and photographed. And one of the most common observations that Westerners had when they discovered these isolated people was what beautiful teeth they had. Even the first settlers to America described in their diaries the Native Americans as having teeth broad and straight and white as piano keys. And this intrigued Dr. Price very much because this is not what he was seeing in his practice. He was seeing decay. He was seeing blackened, crooked, unattractive teeth. Well, Dr. Price decided that he was going to see for himself whether these reports were true. And so he embarked on a series of investigations that took him 10 years to complete and took him to many isolated parts of the globe in order to answer two questions. The first question was it true? Was it true that isolated people living far from all the so-called benefits of civilization had excellent dental health? They did not suffer from cavities. They did not have dental deformities. And by inference, if they had good dental health, good overall health. The second question was, if he could find these healthy populations, what were they eating? What was the type of diet that supported this kind of health? He was not interested in what unhealthy people were eating. He knew what unhealthy people were eating. He knew what his patients were eating. But he didn't know what to tell them to eat to be healthy. So that was the genius of Dr. Price. He asked the right questions, and then he very systematically went about answering those questions.
Well, Dr. Price was a famous researcher that investigated native tribes that had never been touched by white man, and some that did have contact with white men. He showed that the way we were able to survive for so long in the wild and have quite a healthy existence, which he documented scientifically, was we worked with Mother Nature. We didn't work against her. We are part of Mother Nature. We just started getting a little too cocky for ourselves. Okay? He found where all these native societies were. They all practiced whole food eating. By the way, all the natives in most every tribe in the world ate every consumable part of an animal. The organs, the nervous system, the tongue, the brains, everything. They didn't waste anything. They were respectful to the animals. Okay? They didn't waste it. I could get into a spiritual talk, but I wrote about that in my article. And the average hunter-gatherer worked 3 to 4 hours a day and was done for the rest of the day. Okay, think about that. The average hunter-gatherer society worked 3 to 4 hours a day, and they were usually done before noon. And guess what they spent most of the rest of their time doing?
Peter.
Hey, I think that's a pretty good
That's fine. Good, fine boy. See this way. You come over here. To see you. How old are you?
14 years.
A number of the teeth have decayed cavities in them. And that has happened because he's not eating enough fish or not getting enough milk. Say, you're a fine, big, strong fella. How old are you? 20. You look as though you're a giant. My. Where'd you come from?
Lapras.
Well, that's the place. Did you eat lots of fish when you were a little boy?
Yes.
That's the stuff that makes good bodies. If everybody do that. The most universal disease in the world is the decay of the teeth. And unfortunately, we have not known the cause until we've gone to the primitive people to find how they prevent tooth decay. Our difficulty is that we are adding too much white flour and sugar and do not get enough of the foods that carry the minerals and vitamins.
So here we can see this difference in these dental casts made by Dr. Price. This is the cast of a primitive person, and this is a modern adult. Here you see in the front view. And I've put some architectural drawings here just to make to carry this analogy one step further. You cannot build a strong, wide arch unless you have very strong building materials. So what you see here is beauty, strength, and order. And what you see here is weakness, chaos, what Dr. Price referred to as physical degeneration.
So what did Price show? Price showed that whenever he went to native societies, wherever they had not touched white man's food, what I call the 4 white devils, they hadn't touched white flour, white sugar, no pasteurized dairy products, and no salt, no table salt. Sodium chloride is a poison. It doesn't occur in nature. Salt is not sodium chloride. What do? The salt companies extract all the nutrition, sell it to GNC, sell you sodium chloride, because 97% of all the salt used in the world is used in chemical manufacturing processes and food manufacturing processes, but most of it's used for chemistry, so they got to get all the trace minerals out of there because they disrupt chemical compositions. So they don't make salt for human beings. You got to buy sea salt or you're just getting poisoned. So the doctors say, oh, don't eat salt, it raises your blood pressure. No, not if you eat real salt. And there's lots of experts out there to prove it. But my point is, as long as you don't eat the 4 white devils and you eat what your native race is designed to eat, Price showed that you'll have normal dental structure, minimal cavities, if any, optimal bone growth and development, and minimal disease. As a matter of fact, if you read the book Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, you will find something very interesting. In several countries, among several tribes, they did not even have a word for cancer in their language. In 1936, Dr. Romig, a white doctor that took care of many of the trappers and North American Indians up in the region of British Columbia, said until white man had brought white processed food, until the trappers started bringing the food up to the Indians, he had never seen cancer in his life amongst the Indians, and they didn't even have a word for it in their language, right? That was 1936. Here, 1 in 2 of us is going to die of cancer. So there's your first nutritional lesson. If it's white flour, white sugar, processed table salt, or pasteurized dairy, don't put it in your mouth, only put it in your enemy's mouth. Okay? So, let me show you what happened when people ate the 4 white devils within the first generation. So that means if you exposed your kids, so say their kids all of a sudden showed up at the trading post and some trapper says, here, try this gummy bear, right? And they started getting a hold of it. And this happened in almost all the port cities like Seattle, San Francisco, where the natives started having access to white man's food. Watch this, in the first generation. Look at what happened. Look at the rotten teeth falling out. Already, that is just ugly. How many of you ladies would love to kiss him? Right? It might interest you to know that Weston Price's research showed the instant that you put processed sugar in your mouth, white sugar, the lymphatic flow through your teeth reverses. Instead of the lymphatic fluid coming through the tubules of the teeth from the maxillary arteries and the mandibular arteries to wash the teeth and keep the unfriendly bacteria out of the teeth, the instant you put sugar in your mouth, it reverses the flow and it sucks pathogenic bacteria up into your lymphatic system and into your body, and they circulate until they get to their favorite organ. And in 600 repetitive cases, he took the bacteria out of his patient's teeth and injected it into rabbits. And in every single case, the rabbit within 2 weeks had the exact same disease as patient did. All he did was suck the bacteria out of their teeth. He pulled their cavities out, opened them up, and took an extract, mixed it up in a fluid, and injected it into rabbits. And in every case of 600 cases, the rabbit got the same disease that his patient had, just by taking the bacteria out of the mouth. What percentage of kids' breakfast cereals are sugar? 46 to 53% straight sugar. What are we putting on our breakfast cereals? Skim milk, sugar. What do they put on top of that? White sugar. Hey, isn't this genius?
When the primitive people adopt the food of modern civilization, their teeth decay just as ours do. I've spent several years studying the primitive people in various parts of the world, and I've come as a missionary from them to the people of modern civilization. And I beg of you to learn of their accumulated wisdom. And if you do, you too can have strong, healthy bodies without so much disease as we suffer from these days.
Here is another page from his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. he calls these primitive Eskimos. And when he uses the word primitive, he's using it as a compliment. This is the amazing thing about Dr. Price. He was in awe of the wisdom that they exercised in choosing their foods. And he believed that we had a lot to learn from the traditional people. This was in sharp contrast to the attitude of most Westerners, who believed that we had nothing to learn from these people, that it was all one way. We were bringing civilization to all of these primitive places, and that we had nothing to learn from them. Dr. Price's view was just the opposite. He believed, and he wrote in his book, that if we do not learn from these people the secrets of how to have a healthy diet, we would actually die out as a civilization.
Healthy primitive societies were originally able to avoid physical degeneration and tooth decay, so common in many communities today, because of the nutritionally balanced foods that were readily available to them.
Modern society eats all types of foods that Dr. Price identified as non-foods or dead foods. He labeled refined carbohydrates as the white plague and included in this group all sugar and white flour products. I think the term junk food is pretty accurate to describe this kind of food. Today, we are at a great disadvantage in the selection of foods because we haven't been taught to recognize a specific need for special foods.
Every culture that he went to had one or more sacred foods. The sacred foods were considered very important for pregnant women, nursing mothers, and growing children. These cultures seem to recognize in a way that we have forgotten that nutrition is absolutely vital during that period when the baby is being formed and growing. When the body is being formed, you can't go back in later years and form a perfect body. And the very nutrient-dense food needs to be supplied during that growth period. The sacred food for the Swiss villagers was a very special type of butter. It was the butter that came from the cows when they first went to pasture in the spring. This butter was a deep orange color. And so much did they honor this butter that they had a special ceremony in their churches where they lit a bowl of the butter. They had a wick in the bowl of butter on the altar in their churches to honor the life-giving force in the butter. That was a very special ceremony for the first butter in the spring. The sacred food among the Eskimos was salmon eggs. They had put the salmon eggs in the sun to dry so they would have them throughout the year. And when he asked them why they went to such trouble to preserve these salmon eggs, they said to him, "We need these salmon eggs to have healthy babies." So that was their sacred food. No fish was ever eaten without also eating the roe or the eggs in the fish.
Dr. Price discovered that with individuals undergoing a degenerative process, a chemical analysis of the food disclosed a marked reduction in the intake of some of the important vitamins and minerals. Even primitive societies share our blight when they eat our food. Dr. Price discovered a substance he called Activator X. It belongs in the fat-soluble group. He recognized that the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and F had been deficient in practically every case of active tooth decay. He found that an essential characteristic of the successful dietary programs of primitive societies related to a liberal source of the fat-soluble activator group, such as is found in seafood, especially fish roe, bird's eggs, butterfat of mammal's milk, organs of animals, and insects. Even though the diets of primitive people differed greatly as to type and source, all diets provided a large increase in water-soluble vitamins over modern diets by at least a factor of 4, and at least 10 times more of the fat-soluble vitamins and mineral activators than the displacing diets of commerce. Quality rather than quantity was the important factor. Since these foods were unrefined, they also supplied from 2 to 8 times the minimum daily requirements of calcium and phosphorus, and up to 28 times that of magnesium.
The entire treatment of food, from planting to preparation, was important. Dr. Price believed that changes in nutrition could occur with a change in agricultural methods, and that there was a direct relationship between poor quality foods and the depletion of the minerals in the soil. Primitive societies were aware of the relationship between what they ate and their own reproduction, so nutrition was carefully planned for expectant mothers. When the foods of commerce were substituted for their natural diet, there was evidence of abnormal facial patterns and susceptibility to certain diseases. This Maori family demonstrates the link between nutrition and birth deformities. The eldest child has a normal, well-formed body. After her birth, the parents moved to a plantation and began to eat the foods of commerce. Their second child has a depressed face and flat feet. The next child has club feet. The parents returned to a primitive diet, and later 2 children were born without defects. Proper diet helped produce children without deformities, giving hope for all parents of the future.
The good news is that this trend is reversible. If pregnant women know how to eat, if they know how to feed their developing children, we can reverse this trend. This beautiful young woman was born to a mother who had a facial, narrow face and crowded and crooked teeth. She had some health problems as a young woman. But when she was a teenager, by chance, she started to eat lots of liver. She often went out with her friends, and she said she couldn't afford the more expensive things on the menu, so she ended up eating liver 2 or 3 times a week. She also, at that time, moved to a place where she had access to raw milk, raw Guernsey milk. And the result was this beautiful daughter with naturally straight teeth. My own story is very similar. When I was in college, I went off to France to learn to speak French, and when I was in France, I discovered a food that I had never tasted before, and that food was liver pâté. And my first taste of liver pâté, it was like my body saying, at last you've found what you've been needing. And I actually made quite a pig of myself in France and ate liver pâté morning, noon, and night. But and tried to find it when I came home because I loved it so much. And I was blessed, my first child, this was long before I learned about these principles, just by chance. She has naturally straight teeth and didn't have the health problems that I had as a young woman. So the situation is reversible, and here are some of our beautiful Weston A. Price babies. We're thrilled to see so many young people here today because you're the ones, the young women of childbearing age, you're the ones we're depending on to make these changes so that the next generation can carry the torch for us and get back to work in making this a perfect planet.
Specifically on vitamin K2, right? And this is what, long story short, after a decade of visiting many regions around the world and taking samples and doing studies in his labs and stuff like that, in the 1930s, right, there was no computers and all this sort of stuff. It was very elongated and very, he invested a lot of his time and resources into all this. He assessed that the defining difference in many of these indigenous cultures that had exceptional dental health, right? He found less than 1 or 2% dental disease and stuff, and that was usually the Trojan horse to the generations that followed that had bone structure issues and stuff like that. So most people know an image of the Native Americans. They've got fabulous teeth, bone structure, very eloquent geometry, sort of face and beauty, right? what he found was that was common with people that took their traditional sort of regional intakes based on the foods that they consumed as a cultural aspect to their way of life. When the modern foods came in, the cramped teeth, gum structure and well-being was as a consequence of integrating the modern foods economies. And it's very simple, it's very interesting, but how would you come about that information? And it's very hard to come by, and it's only, just me, like, being alive now with such things as YouTube and stuff where people want to offer their perspectives, and you can combine them all and find the actual reality. And it's like I said, I feel very fortunate to be alive now to be able to assess all this. And so getting on to the whole nutritional topic, right, what I've sort of come to understand is that humanity is being nutritionally suffocated, right? Nutritionally suffocated across the board. And by that, it sets us up for looking external to, say, pharmaceutical companies and stuff that want to make a profit from those sort of things. The other side benefit is that it sort of traps the consciousness in a certain band, like limit of just being able to get up, go to a job, earn money, pay our debts, and go back and then catch a disease at some stage in our lives, rather than being the shamanic sort of culture that doesn't allow this crap to operate. All the indigenous cultures, they had a medicine man, sort of someone that patrolled the tribe so the behaviours couldn't get away, right? So we go back a bit on history, and the conquistadors that went through South America and the British that established in Australia, they disconnected the ability for the indigenous to their land and to their oral wisdom keepings, So what I sort of suggest is that once you sort of integrate the nutrition into your paradigm, is that the potential for your intuitive abilities to rise is just the natural state of humanity, right? To have the perception and to know truth and to feel it and to use your gut and to have the whole repertoire of our senses, not just the five that we're convinced that that's all we are, right? And so say you talk about iodine and you took it, right? And say if you understand where iodine works on the endocrine system, which if you do any spiritual sort of understanding is the chakra points. So if you take that, then perhaps you activate all your chakras and then you become intuitive.
The glands were the most important features of the human being.
One of the most misunderstood functions of the human body today is our glandular or endocrine system. Glands secrete hormones that trigger reproduction. Fertility and procreation had high value in Egyptian ideology.
The ancients were very much in tune with how the energy systems in the body, or the chakras, as the East Indians would talk about them, were connected to the glands.
Ancient teachings speak of 7 energy centers in the body called chakras. Parallels occur between the concepts of chakras, or energy centers in the body, and our glands. It appears they are 2 ways of describing the same thing, through spirituality and through science. Ancient Egyptians had a holistic understanding of the significance of the glands and their central role in reproduction and in consciousness. If we can decode the symbols, we see that the sacredness of procreation is readily visible in ancient Egyptian art.
When you see a boy or a man, you see a kind of a bottle on his head. That is not a bottle or not a white crown symbolizing Upper Egypt, as my colleagues and the scholars say. No, this is a gland in the human body known as the thymus, located behind the lungs.
The thymus is most active when a baby is in utero. It continues to be active until puberty. Then it begins to shrink and is atrophied when we stop being fertile. It was a critical activator of consciousness.
First of all, your mind is what's interacting with the artificial intelligence belief systems. And when the artificial intelligence is interacting with your mind, it is your own free will that is co-creating with your parasympathetic body to stay within the program architecture of the belief system. So for one to free their mind, they must realize that their mind must settle into their heart. In meditation, when your mind goes into your heart, you're reaching the highest point of perception because you're not perceiving with the eyes, you're perceiving everything with the heart. And in this meditation process or in this relaxing process, your crown goes into your heart. You visualize your crown chakra settling into your heart, your third eye into your heart, your throat into your heart, your root into your heart, your solar into your heart, your sacrum into your heart, and everything in the center of the heart. And we say, I return myself to the 0 point of the fetus in mother's womb. And from there, it's what you can perceive from the information of how much your body is resisting from wanting to go into the 0 point of the fetus in mother's womb. That is how much the mind is occupied. And we must learn to unoccupy the mind so we can enter the silence between the doorways of two worlds. And what are the doorways between the worlds? The fact that our brain says, the belief system says, you cannot speak to the infinite ever after life, or you're going to stay in this 3D world and continue on. The other side of that, it is real. And the mind can't fully accept that because there's belief system enhancement tools spread throughout the energy environment of our world that make other people powerful disbelievers.
Yes.
So there might be people that have a person around them that is a massive disbeliever, and as soon as you get away from that person, the paranormal experience will begin to happen and happen more as you allow your brain to settle in your heart, your root into your heart, so on and so forth. And you begin this natural process of sovereignty from the heart. It's sovereignty is built into your DNA. It's a knowingness of freedom.
Yes.
The red crown is another. It's the womb, the placenta, the thymus, and the womb are connected for the cycle of life. When you see the double crown, the red crown is the womb and the placenta. The white crown is the thymus, who has its influence on the womb. That's the symbol of one of the glands.
I then started to consider, it was all very well saying, well, we understand that the sun affects behavior, but how could I measure that? How could I check it? So I considered that perhaps what I was saying was that the sun affects the endocrine system, and that affects the genes when the sperm enters the egg. So is there any other way that I could measure changes in the endocrine system, the hormones, and the sun? So I thought, well, the most obvious measure would be to measure the 28-day signal of the sun and see if any of the hormones, female hormones, change every 28 days. And here we have the sun. We've got 28 days negative, 28 days positive, negative, positive, and I've drawn that out as a sine wave, positive, negative, positive, negative. Now what I'm saying is, does anything happen to the female hormones after day 7, 14, 21, or 28? If there does, then I can say, well, the sun is regulating hormones, and that's the causal agent, if you like. So I had a look at the 28-day cycle of the female hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and I equated these with a follicle-stimulating hormone here, which is responsible for kick-starting the luteinizing hormone and the production of estrogen and progesterone. And on the face of it, there was no, on first inspection, there was no correlation. In other words, I said, what happens to the follicle-stimulating hormone after 7 days? Well, nothing. Not a lot's going on. What happens after 14 days? Not a lot. What happens after 21? Not a lot. Then what I decided to do was, I put this follicle-stimulating hormone graph here, that's this one here, and I put it on top of the 28-day cycle, like so, and I rotated it like so. And what I've discovered was that the follicle-stimulating hormone is switched on day 2.5 of the sun. So as the sun spins, the follicle-stimulating hormone starts to produce the hormone, and then it follows the sunspot cycle for 14 days and stops. On the 14th day, we have the follicle-stimulating hormone, the red one. In addition, we have the solar cycle itself underneath. So we've got 2 cycles which add together. That gives us a pulse in the luteinizing hormone, which is this one here. So we get a massive pulse on day 14, and that changes the amount of estrogen and progesterone being produced by the lining of the womb, which either tells the lining of the womb to accept the egg or to reject it and go through the process of menstruation. So what we found was, when I looked into it in a lot of detail, and that's all in the Tutankhamun prophecies, because the ancient civilizations were well aware of this mechanism, what we find is that as the sun spins every 28 days, showers the earth with particles, just as we said before. The particles go up and down every 1 second. The magnetic field varies every 1 second. This affects the pineal gland in the female brain. The female brain affects the production of melatonin, the timing hormone, and that affects the production of estrogen and progesterone. And that's why females menstruate every 28 days. Because sometimes you say, well, sometimes it's 32 days and 24. If this goes round, what you'll find is you'll have 28 days, 28 days, 28 days, 32 days, 28, 28, 28, 34 days, 28, 28. So it'll go backwards and forwards as the North Pole slides through the equator. Another effect of the sun is that, as I mentioned earlier, because the equator is rotating more quickly than the North Pole and the South Pole, the magnetic field around the equator becomes bent. And in 1962, 2 engineers, Babcock and Layton, suggested a process that was going on, saying, well, it looks like the magnetic field that goes from north to south is getting wound up around the sun. It's bursting out into these spots. If you look at the sun, you get these black spots. They're magnetic fields. They're magnetism bursting out of the sun, but we see them as black areas. They're understood pretty well nowadays. When I was at Cranfield and I started to look at the sunspot cycle, I made a graph out of asking the question, when would those 3 parameters be back together again? And I started the graph by hand, and after about 5 months I gave up. So I said to the girl in the computer center, put these figures into the computer. 37 days, 26 days, 365.25 days. When will they come back together? She said, well, that's easy. If this is 37, and that's 26, that's 962. And if that's a year, it's 962. I said, well, yeah, I know that. But I want to see the graph as it progresses, because I suspect there's a lower common denominator, and they actually come together before that. I don't know when it's going to be. It might be after 500 years. Might be 300 years. I can't see unless I've got a graph, and I can't work out the lowest common denominator because of the fractions involved, the decimal points. So I put them into the computer, and the computer said, okay, every 87 days when we took those measurements, we'll have a time interval. So we've got 87, 87, 87, 87, 87, 87, 87. So after 700 days, if we do a graph of the world going around and a graph of the combined magnetic field going around, take one from the other, we come out with this difference graph. I call it the sunspot graph. And after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these, it looks like we get 3 positives and 3 negatives, and that is the 11-year sunspot cycle, because we know sunspots come and go every 11.5 years if we look at the sun. So I looked at the graph, and I saw a few problems coming here, because I could see here, if we look at the shape of this, we've got M, M, V, and then we've got a sort of crown, and a spiky crown. So I thought, if I can find out that pattern, where it is, they must all begin again, because it's the same pattern. So I looked and looked and looked, and after 187 years, they all start off together. There we get the crown, the crown, the crown, and so on. The M, the M, the M, and the upside-down crown, and so on. And then I noticed something quite strange. I noticed these although this was 700 days, 700, 700, 700, this one was 787. This one was 787. There were anomalies in the graph. And when I started to reconcile these anomalies, and that took me some time, like about 2 years to figure it through, I realized that the sun, although it should be positive at the top and negative at the bottom, the equator should be neutral. But what I found was that it's actually warped. It's like an old record. It got broken on the way here today, I'm afraid, but that was an old pop record. I think it was You Are My Sunshine or something like that. Now what we know is that they call it the neutral sheet. The neutral sheet is warped. We know that, the physicists know that, the astronomers know that. What this graph tells me, which nobody knew, is that every 187 years, that neutral warp moves. Because the graph tells me that after analyzing it for 2 years. And after another 187 years, this one moves again. And after another 187 years. And in fact, so now we have 4 variables. We have the pole, the equator, the world, and the neutral warp. So when will they all be back together? Well, the answer to that is 18,169 years. But what did it mean? So I took another look. Well, what it means is that something's interfering with this neutral warp on the sun. We would expect the warp to follow the red line, but expect the equator of the sun's magnetic field to be neutral along the red line, but we know it's warped and tilted. And if we look at the warp and the tilt, I know these cycles every 11.5 years are being interfered with along the length. They're being interfered with here, 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 and here on my graph. And when we have a look at the sunspot cycles itself over the centuries, we can see that the sunspot amplitude is going up and down in sympathy with this neutral warp. So I thought, well, that's interesting, because if that warp's moving, when will they come back together? What's actually happening? So I had a look at the warp then, and I started off with the warp as it is, and I put another one on top, and I said, okay, what happens if the warp moves every 187 years, little bit by bit, like that? It's moving 187 years, like so on. And what I discovered was that, the magnetic field of the sun, as this moves here, see these arrows? If we put them on top of each other, those are the arrows showing the direction of the magnetic field, that way, that way, that way. If we move them like this, over 187 years, we see the magnetic field of the Earth, of the sun, reverses. It goes from negative to positive. Now, I can calculate how long that will take simply by putting those the bits that interfere on together. So in other words, these are the bits that interfere here, and I'm saying, when does the black bar hit the next black bar? When does that black bar hit that one? And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. It's 187-year cycles. That's 20 multiplied by 68,302. That's 1,366,040 days. And that was a number worshipped by the Mayas of Central America. Now, do you see the problems? Okay? This is a mosaic sun shield from Monte Alban in Mexico. It's a sun shield. It has 4 arrows. It has 85 golden loops or sunspots, and it has 11 pendants. 4 times 8 times 11 multiplied by 365.25 comes out to be 1,366,040 days. So now you know what you're up against. We know what we're up against. These guys weren't the chimpanzees flying around in trees eating bananas like the archaeologists tell us. These people were smarter than we are today. And if we look at the sunspot graphs, we understand why civilizations rise and fall with sunspots, because we know sunspots affect fertility. We know how they affect fertility. They affect the particles coming off the sun. That affects the brain. That affects the production of hormones. So every time we get a sunspot cycle, the pharaohs died out. The early Greeks died out. When we have a maximum, we have a pyramid maximum. The Mayas died out in AD 750. We had the Incas died out in 1530. All because the sun failed their fertility needs. There were no babies being born. Not only were there no babies being born, but when that magnetic field reverses, when that neutral warp reverses, what happens to the sun? Well, we can see what happens. If the sun's magnetic field goes that way, if it twists on its axis like that, the Earth turns on its axis upside down, and we have a pole shift. Now, of course, that doesn't happen every time. These are magnetically coupled. If that moves that way, that moves that way. If that moves that way, that moves that way. It's like a compass needle. If you've got a compass, it follows the magnetic field of the Earth. So we know the Maya, we know from that mosaic sun shield that the Maya knew the correct number for the sunspot cycle because they encoded it in that mosaic sun shield. And we need to ask, why did they worship another number 520 days longer? 1,366,560 days long. And they measure their calendar from the year 3113 BC. Because they knew in the year 3113 BC, 5,000 years ago, the magnetic field of the sun reversed. They know that. And the planet Venus reversed. The Earth did not reverse because we're further away. But they called it the birth of Venus. And that's why Venus now is rotating upside down. And it's very slow because it used to rotate that way quickly, but when it got turned upside down, it slowed down. One day it will stop and start turning the other way again. So they called it the birth of Venus.
In the early 1900s, alchemist Schwaller de Lubitz presented a work called The Temple of Man. It demonstrated that the architects of the Luxor temple used sacred geometry, which reflected the exact proportions of the human body. As in all Egyptian temples, the most sacred space was located at the back of the temple, the Holy of Holies, which corresponded to the pineal gland. When activated, the pineal gland is said to stimulate the evolution of higher states of consciousness. If the temples were metaphors of the human body, the pineal gland corresponded with the Holy of Holies.
The first bone that is affected when the diet is poor is this bone here. It's called the maxilla. It's the upper jaw bone. And almost every other bone in the head connects to the maxilla. Here is a rear view. Here's the maxilla. And then you have this very interesting bone called the sphenoid, which is like a butterfly and has these wings that stick out. And this has to be a strong bone to have a broad face. There are also little depressions in here for the organs, the glands, hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the pineal gland. And if the face is broad, there'll be a very nice broad space for those glands to live in.
He showed that within the next generation, so these people then had children, and those kids were already born with bony growth and development. Look, a narrowed maxillary arch. These teeth are crowded. You've got a faulty rule of thirds. So what you see is, look at the long bottom third. Look at the tiny little noses on these kids. The instant that you get a short middle third, so if you just go like that, I'll show you what the rule of thirds is. Put your thumb up like that. With your teeth together, that should be the exact distance from the bottom of your teeth to the bottom of your nose. That should be the exact length of your nose, so that's the middle third. And that should be the exact length from between your eyes to where your hair should be growing. Okay? So you got 3/3. That's called the rule of thirds in craniofacial growth and development. 1, 2, 3. The cranium grows in that ratio if the genetics are working correctly. He showed within 1 generation already they had dysfunctional craniofacial growth and development. Ladies and gentlemen, your nasal air passages and your oral airway If you do that, the size of that areola in your nasal passages are calibrated to your body size and dimensions so you can effectively oxygenate your body. These children will never be able to effectively oxygenate their body without opening their mouth and dropping their head down and forward. We call that forward head posture. Anybody that does any work in orthopedics or athletes knows forward head posture is a mechanical disorder. And research in 1988 by Shirley Sarman showed that in 1988, before the computer boom, 98% of high school students already had what she listed as significant postural faults. 98% in 1988. Today it would be at least 100%. Okay? So that was only one generation on white men's food. That's some scary stuff. Okay? People had, oh, but we can't feed organic, it's so expensive. Oh, you know, we play this BS banjo. You ever heard that before? We can't feed everyone organic, it would cost too much, the farmers couldn't do it. Oh, have I got news for you. You guys probably, a lot of you don't know, but I collect books. I'm a bit of a bookaholic. I've got maybe $500,000 worth of them. A lot of rare medical books. And I like to find the truth. And you can't get it. If you want to find the truth about anything, get a book prior to 1950. Okay?
And then, of course, we have the U.S. government official diet. With the food pyramid and resulting in all these pyramidal-shaped people. And believe me, the rationale for this diet is not to make you healthy. It is to promote the products of commodity agriculture, because that's what the U.S. Department of Agriculture is set up to do, is promote commodity agriculture.
The thing, what you sort of expounded on in the last half hour related to cholesterol and heart disease and stuff, is that when you combine cholesterol, vitamin D3 and K2, is that cholesterol is sort of the trunk of many things, and I can get into CoQ10 quickly as well, but say if you're in the sun, right, and, you know, humanity and the sun are, like, the sun is our life, right? If we don't have the sun, then plants don't grow, and, you know, we're sort of convinced that the sun is bad at the moment, but it's actually vital, right? The key is,
yeah, and I actually mentioned in the meditation that really, I think the sun is a metaphor, a physical example of the spirit which shines through us, and we look at the sun is shining on us with the physical side, and then the shining in through us is on the spiritual side. I digress there, but
hey mate, digress all you want.
Yeah.
But say if you lack cholesterol and you go in the sun, right? Your body's ability to naturally create vitamin D3 is inhibited, right? So vitamin D3 is actually amazing in itself, and if anyone wants to really do an hour's research, there was a really excellent Project Camelot lecture by a German lady, Gabriele Stroner, I think, in 2009, and she goes into it, and for me it was fascinating because I live in Australia and I live in the hottest city on the planet at the moment, but there's a potential with the angle of the sun here that I don't actually get enough vitamin D3. And I found that fascinating, right? So when you actually consume cholesterol, it actually, in part, is integrated into your skin and under your skin. And when the sunlight hits the cholesterol, that triggers a whole heap of processes to kick off the creation of vitamin D3 in you, right? And so, like, what Gabrielle talked about is 15 to 20 minutes in the sun will actually create 15,000 units, potentially, of vitamin D3, depending on the time of the day and many factors, right? So if you talk about 15,000 international units of D3, I mean, I've done a lot of research into D3 on its own, I share that in a topic, but so if I look at the multivitamins in most of the drugstores or pharmaceutical companies that we call them pharmacies here, and in a typical multivitamin there's 400 units, right? I mean, if you are in the sun for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and you can potentially get 15,000 units, what will 400 do? Nothing, right? It's pointless. And so, and then if you get a relative decent amount of D3 in your body, what it does is it actually triggers your body to release two important proteins, osteocalcin and NGP. And what they do, they work in unison to actually manage calcium in your body. And then, but the thing is, when vitamin D3 releases them, it does them in an inactive way. And to activate them, you actually require vitamin K2 to be present in the body. And then if vitamin K2 is present, what those two proteins, NGP and osteocalcin, do is they take calcium from where it's not meant to be and put it where it's meant to be. So say we talked about atherosclerosis and pulmonary atherosclerosis. What those things are hardening of the heart and hardening of the arteries. And it's due to calcification of them. So when you lack vitamin K2, the body doesn't know how to handle calcium. So when you have, enough cholesterol, which kicks off the vitamin D3 thing, and then you have vitamin K2 to actually activate those two proteins, what happens is that your body goes, okay, this cholesterol in areas you're not meant to have it, I can now go and put it where it needs to be. And, if you have those things in your body in adequate amounts, you can repair your teeth damage. Your bone structures become very much, more harder and stuff like that, where, bone density, particularly for women as they grow older, is a huge issue, right? And you're talking about Les Visible before, about his breaking hip. And, I don't know how he survived for that day and all that he had to go through, but, if I can't help but think if he had vitamin K2 for like 20 years prior, he wouldn't have probably had to go through that experience. There's purpose to experience, and you know what I mean, but I feel those things, and I feel very, if I've got the knowledge, it's a responsibility, and I'm just glad that you're around, mate, to actually, listen to what I want to say, and then want to share it with other people.
When you see facial structure like this, what you're seeing is the full expression of the genetic potential. We all have a blueprint for our bodies, and that blueprint is the genetics. And the genetics of every one of us is to have a strong, sturdy, and attractive body with naturally straight teeth. That is your genetic blueprint. Whether or not the body is built according to that blueprint depends on the building materials, and the building materials are the foods. So if you want to think that the genetics comes from the Creator, our health is actually a partnership with the Creator. The genetics are given to us, but our job is to make sure that the growing child has the right building materials.
And what I've sort of come to understand is that a lot of the levels and a lot of the things that are actually vital to us are actually advised to take at certain levels through recommended daily advice and stuff like that. And what I've sort of come to appreciate is that the levels that we're actually offered to being recommended are actually hopelessly lower than what we actually physically need, right? And I find that the human body, right, and its ability to adapt and survive and stuff is absolutely genius, right? The key is, right, as I mentioned, it's the battleground for our consciousness. It's like we have this sort of relationship for our conscious to have this experience in a physical body, and if the physical body is locked down, then it limits our perception abilities, right? And I inherently believe that everyone has a level of intuitive ability. Some people are like Michael Jordan on the basketball court, some people are like Bill Murray, right? But the key is to have the open possibility that things like deja vus and synchronicities are just the start of it. And what happens is, like, say you interact with someone, you can pick up certain senses and abilities and stuff, and then also the people that are leading government and stuff like that, you can tell they're full of crap, right? And you just don't accept it, and then you regain your power. But cholesterol, right? I mean, iodine was a big thing for me, and I appreciate the opportunity to sort of get that on record. And if people want to get into that, then they can go and investigate that themselves. But what I found like with vitamin D3, salt, cholesterol and stuff is what I sort of said. It's we're limited. The thing with cholesterol is, you know, society and the institutions that benefit from, say, a misnomer being put out there, they gain from it. And this is where the sort of, you're introducing money and stuff and that, because money is the avenue for personal gain and things like that. But getting into cholesterol specifically, okay, and what you were talking about, the collection of calcium in certain areas, is called atherosclerosis and heart disease, and pulmonary atherosclerosis is the hardening of the arteries around, you know, the vital organs and stuff like that. And, you know, cholesterol is blamed for that. From my investigations, it's not actually in any way related to it. Cholesterol is actually, like Dr. Stephen Sinatra, who's written a book like the cholesterol, related to cholesterol and stuff, and it's actually really vital to our existence, and it's core to many things. And, you know, cholesterol came to me when I was writing earlier this year, and it was a bit out of the blue, and it's like, well, do I want to research this or not? And I tend to be like you, I'm an observer and I leave no stone unturned, and this really excellent documentary called Statin Nation came to my presence. And it's this guy just like you or me, and he was fascinated on the topic, and he did a whole heap of investigation into it. And what that revealed to me was that, you know, the incorporation into our belief that cholesterol is bad is beneficial for pharmaceutical companies. Not only that, that's the first layer. The second layer is that by limiting the intake of cholesterol and saturated fat, it actually prevents our cognitive abilities on many levels, right? So our brains are full of cholesterol and saturated fat, you know, along with water and salt. Many of the things that we're actually told not to take. And so, you know, science sort of says that cholesterol is the cause of heart disease and stuff like that. What I've actually sort of put together is cholesterol has a relationship with many other nutritional elements, such as what you mentioned, vitamin K2 and D3. And K2 in itself is a fascinating thing. It's not that commonly known as yet. And these three things, like cholesterol, D3 and K2, they have an order in which they operate. So, and the other thing with cholesterol is it's a bit like this trunk of a tree. And if you cut a tree off at the trunk, you lose all the option of all the branches and the leaves. And being the trunk, it's the precursor for many of the hormones and experiences that we're allowed to actually, or we can possibly have.
Right? Remember, your body always has a need for nutrition, and it sends you after nutrition. So if you eat food and there's no nutrition in it, your brain says, keep eating, keep eating. I'm short on omega-3 fatty acids. Keep eating. I'm short on B12. Keep eating. I'm short, you know, and you just keep eating. So what do? People are literally starving to death, and this is what they look like.
So what I'm going to do, again, you have a hypothesis. I know this sounds obvious, okay? It should be, you know, chisel and stone, but it's a hypothesis like any other hypothesis. So what you want to do is say, can it explain all the observations, and can we find observations that it can't explain? You know, so this is Fat Louisa, this young lady here. She's a Pima Indian, and that photo was taken in 1902. And so we're going to talk about the Pima, because the Pima are the poster children for obesity and diabetes in America. Supposedly 1 out of every 2 Pima adults are diabetic, and some huge proportion are obese. And the point is, in the mid-19th century, the Pima were the most affluent Native American tribe. They are located in Arizona on the Gila River. And there was a wagon train route to California that went through there. And a U.S. battalion went through in 1846, and the surgeon John Griffin, who went on to L.A. and started like the first, you know, medical clinic in the Pueblo of Los Angeles,
Griffin described the Pima as sprightly and in fine health. And he talked about the greatest abundance of food, and they take care of it well. And every traveler who went through, I have about 20 different memoirs of travelers, soldiers, doctors who went through the Pima territory. They grew their own crops. They grew melons. They grew wheat. They grew, they ate this fruit of the saguaro cactus. They fished and ate clams from the Gila River, and they hunted widely. And what happened is, in 1849, gold is discovered in California. Over the next 10 to 15 years, between 20 and 60,000 49ers head west through the Pima territory. And the U.S. government, the Pima are so affluent, the U.S. government asks them to feed the pioneers as they're going west on the wagon trains, which they do, and they also protect them from the Apaches. And then from about after the 1860s, Anglos start moving into the neighborhood, and they start diverting the Gila River water to irrigate their own farms. And by the 1880s, the Pima are going through what they call the period of famine, the era of famine, that lasts for 20 years until they're put on a reservation and they're put on government rations. And in 1901, 1902, Frank Russell, a Harvard anthropologist, comes to spend a year. Russell had tuberculosis, so he was hoping that doing his research in Arizona would cure it, which he didn't. And so he spends a year with the Pima. He writes a seminal study. He takes this photo of Fat Louisa, and he says, many old persons exhibit a degree of obesity that's in striking contrast with the tall and sinewy Indian conventionalized in popular thought. And the following year, 1903 to 1905, Alex Hrdlicka, who went on to be the curator of physical anthropology at the Smithsonian for 30 years, I mean, a very well-respected physician turned anthropologist, he was traveling around the southwestern United States and Mexico examining Native American tribes. He spent 8 years doing it. And about the Pima and the Southern Utes, he wrote, especially well-nourished individuals, females and also males, occur in every tribe and at all ages. But real obesity is found almost exclusively among the Indians on reservations and among adults of less than 60 years of age. This woman right here is a Southern Ute that Hrdlicka took a photo of. The point is, the Pima have gone from being extremely affluent through a period of famine to being extremely impoverished, living on government rations to stay alive, and they've gone from being sprightly and fine health to having an obesity problem. So they've gone the opposite way that our hypothesis predicts they should have gone. Both Hrdlicka and Russell struggled to make sense of this. Russell suggests that maybe there were some fat-producing elements in their food. Hrdlicka considered the possibility that maybe because they lived on reservations, they were less physically active than they used to be. And so this is why they were obese, but he couldn't figure out why the women tended to have the obesity problem, and the women worked much harder than the men. They were basically treated as beasts of burden in these tribes. And then he even pointed out that the Pueblo, who live in the essentially cities who have been sedentary for 1,000 years, did not have an obesity problem. So in 1928, a couple of University of Chicago economists go to do a study of the Sioux on the South Dakota Crow Creek Reservation. And these people are incredibly poor, poor beyond our imagination. They live in 1 to 2 room shacks. And again, this is a Native American reservation in South Dakota in 1928. 1 to 2 room shacks, unfit for occupancy, 4 to 8 people per room. 40% of the children live in homes without toilets. Water is drawn from the river. 15 families with 32 children on this reservation are living chiefly on bread and coffee. 40% of the women, 25% of the men, and 10% of the children would be termed, quote, distinctly fat, while 20% of the women, 1 in 4 men and 1 in 4 children, are extremely thin. This is something we're going to talk about. Obesity and malnutrition coexisting in the same incredibly impoverished population. And remember, today we're explaining these levels of obesity as caused by prosperity, but this was not the problem these people had in 1928. Just to catch up on the Pima, in 1954, the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Arizona did a study of the Pima, and the people who did it said over 50% of the children are obese by their 11th birthday, living in widespread poverty. They also said that, unlike the Anglos, they continued to get fatter as they got heavier, and I would say today, you wouldn't say unlike the Anglos.
Dr. Price spent quite a bit of time with Native Americans. Now, these are not his photographs. These are some famous photographs of Native Americans. They were strikingly handsome people before they came in contact with the West, with beautiful facial structure. This is a Navajo. And the first people in the New World were in awe of the magnificent body structure of the Native Americans. The Indians in Texas, for example, were described as on average over 7 feet tall. They never wore clothes, not even in the cold weather. When the ice formed on the ponds, it was a lot of fun for them to get up in the morning and break the ice and go swimming in the ponds. You know, the Indians did not have horses before the white man came, and they hunted on foot. And so swift were they, and they had so much stamina that they were able to outrun deer and buffalo. They hunted on foot. What a change there has been with several generations of Western foods. These are photographs of Dr. Price taken in northern Canada. These were some isolated Native Americans. He found no tooth decay, no dental deformities, very good facial structure, no signs of any disease. And they lived mostly off game animals, like the moose and the elk. And once again, they had this food combining rule. They never ate lean meat. They hunted animals during the season when they were the fattest, and they hunted the older animals because the older animals had more fat on them.
So now we come to, I love maps, so we're looking at Nika. This is where those giant crystals are located. It gives you an idea, Copper Canyon and Sierra Madres. Okay, some other maps. And this is Copper Canyon. And this is, again, this is Tarahumara country. And the Tarahumara Indians were very mystical, and still are, very mystical Native Americans that are some of the greatest runners in the world. And the man that I got the invitation to go in the Crystal Caves was the manager for a racing team of 5 Tarahumaras that won several races in the United States, up at the Leadville 100. So they would run 100 miles at a time in the Los Angeles Crest race. And you can see what they wear. They have, their shoes are huaraches, but they glue tires to the bottom of them with leather straps. And they wear kind of like a, it's not gauze, it's like a gunny sack, but they make these skirts. And they drink this tesguino corn you could say. It's a drink. It's got liquor in it, I'm sure, and chia seeds, and this is gives them the ability to run ultra-long distances. They're known to run deer down to the point of exhaustion. Because they were so elusive, the Spanish were not able to conquer the Tarahumara because they were able to outrun them, and they lived in the canyon, Copper Canyon. So the Spaniards weren't able to really mix their DNA and mutate their gene code. That's one of the reasons I think that they're so unique. And Nika, where the crystals are found, is a Tarahumara word. It's called the Raramari is their language. And it means the place of no sun, the place of shade. They live right on the cliffs of the canyon. So there's a deep connection to the Tarahumara Indians, I believe, to the selenite crystals.
You talked about dreams, and for me, my dreams are sort of, it's another of my homes, and music and dreams, and in some way I try to go where I should go, but it is in some way it's sort of very difficult to make this last sort of like step. I don't really know why I don't do it.
Well, I think I can help you figure out a few answers. And this will be a process of sorting through. As I said in the beginning, you have this access to the library of self, but your self has given you a layer of keys. And right now you only have one key, and that's to the front librarian who tells you where the sections are. Each section is separated, so you have to have a different key to get into them. And that's about exploring your present life and the life you've led here as well as your past life. You know, as I'm going deeper into your past life, one of the major past lives that comes up with significant contracts is in Atahualpa area of Cusco in South America. And when I look into this time, you were what's called a runner. You would run from one city to another on these Incan paved roads. And specifically what you would do as you were running, you would take this special brew of stuff that would give you thousands of calories and sugar and everything you needed to run like 200 miles in a day and a half, quite literally. There are multiple recordings of these Incan runners that would go from one point to another because they were running with spirit feet, and they were also running and singing in their mind, and they were attached to the music of life. And many times these runners were dream seers. They weren't just there to run from one city to another to tell about this person's doings or that troop movements. They were literally exchanging between shamans of the cities. So that person who was a runner trained their entire life to be the running shaman, to be that person who could connect to the dream world as well as their physical body and move faster than the concepts of man. So this is what's coming to you. You're in slow motion compared to that past life. You understand this?
Yes, I think I do, and I feel something in my body.
Okay. So, go ahead.
It does something with me, definitely.
Okay. So we got to figure out how you can go a little faster in your mind, but even though you're living your life now, you can move faster in a different way, in a different concept. The first concept here is the giveaway. Now, there are parts of your life that are anchoring you down. It's like when a boat's in a harbor and it throws out 2 anchors instead of 1 because the waves break a little heavier in the harbor, as well as they don't want the ship going around in circles, so it's anchored horizontally and vertically. And that's what you need. You need something that is separate of a single anchor. You need to throw another anchor in the water, and that's going to be your spirit anchor. That is going to be based off of the prayers you want to express to yourself about moving faster. So it's going to call for a time where you say, Thomas of the past, present, and the future, please listen to my prayers so I may understand the position in my life, so I may have direction to run at my full pace. And then you'll need to create more of that. And you're going to want to say these prayers before you go to bed and right after you wake up. Because it's in your dream time you are experiencing this very high-speed energy, very high-speed visions. And your physical mind and body are having a tough time interpreting them because they go by at very much a fast-forward pace. So you have to take up the control of life and hit slow, because that's literally what you're experiencing now. You're connecting to this dreamtime runner going between city and city who experiences the world very fast. Now the next distinct purpose here is to know that the runner, the Incan runner that was in you, was a runner in other lifetimes, in other concepts. I can go right back into the time where many of the tribes were invading Greece and Italy and beginning to get their revenge. And that was simply because they had taken up thousands of years of brutality from the Roman Empire or any of the other empires that were there before. And your soul was running, as a soul this time, you were running and telling one army's movement to another army's movement and one army's movement to another army's movement. But at the same time, you also were telling about the wounded and where the wounded were being retreated to. And you come to a point in this past life where you saw so many wounded, you stopped running for the armies. And then you just simply started walking away from the war, walking towards the other lands and back to the Silk Road and into the Himalayas, until finally you couldn't walk no more. And there you are in the highest mountains of the highest part of the world, surrounded by an almost desolation of mountains. And that's where your spirit brothers found you. and then took you into a home and taught you the process of chanting with the monks that lived in the high mountains. They had heard your call long ago, heard your pain before, and brought you in and began to teach you the music of the monks of the Himalayas. Have you ever heard their chanting?
Some of my best friends are living up there. We have made beautiful film about one of the rituals, and finally could give it out to the public with all the blessings of His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
That's wonderful. So this is deeply connecting to you, isn't it? I can sense your tears.
It's too beautiful what you're telling me, because it's
all right. Take your time. Formulate your words. These are good tears, my friend. Good tears. We're healing right now.
It is so beautiful, this life. And people are so ugly with each other. To see what is happening to your beautiful country, I've been there many times. It hurts. It hurts. I know I shouldn't let all this come to me. I know I should be able to more sort of get distance and looking from up down, because I know I cannot help. And if I do, I can do a little help. It may be through my trying to understand, not to understand this situation, but to let it be. And I sort of, I have sometimes a problem just to let it be the way it is. It's good the way it is. But it's sometimes very, very difficult. And then comes this dream right now, my white pigeon, which I see on my desk in my dream on my desk, and she is sitting on what? She is sitting on the book of Yona. And I take her in my hand. She's beautiful white, and I want to bring her to the garden. And she flies a little bit around and then comes back to me and sort of like says, I want to live here. And I don't know why it comes now, but I have all these animals which come and help me, and especially this white dove. It's Yona. It's unbelievable. And now you bring me now again also to these dreams. And my question is really how, what shall I say? How I don't know what. Oh, or better said, what is? How do I best prepare for this turning point? Because I'm standing before it like all of us, and I think my duty will be somewhere to be of as much help as I can.
Now the next thing is, as I told you, you were led into high in the Himalayas. Okay, and I know that you've worked with the Dalai Lama before, and you've done some incredible stuff. But there's another layer there, and it's not going to be easy for you to confront these layers, because the work you did to get that video out, as well as the others, it greatly affected thousands of people, and you're not accepting the prayers of those people. When you were brought into the high temple to heal you of your war wounds and to help you rest, it was so that a future you would hear the prayers of the person who put down the weapons of war. Because to me right now, you're high up in this temple, waiting to go into Shambhala, waiting to finish your training, and you're chanting with several others, and you're creating this sound and a vibration in an echo chamber. And at the same time, your heart, your soul of your heart, is literally broadcasting the music of your home world, which is making a harmonic frequency that is truly crossing the ages and trying to communicate to you through your heart. So it means that you have to slow life down even more, and talk to your heart and hear your heart's music, so you can connect to that person that's in that temple, communicating across the stream of time to you, the you now. I mean, the tears of before was about me helping you push open that door and allow that vibration in. The tears that you're experiencing now are this energy washing away. Stick your foot in the door so it doesn't close. So when this show is over, you put on your headphones, you play the music, and you start to pray. It doesn't matter what the words are, just do it. Pray to your dogs, to your animals, give thanks to them, give thanks to your home. Everything that can come to your mind, because this buildup of energy will be an even greater release. And once you release, you're going to realize your keychain has more keys on it. Okay? You don't have one key on your keychain. You have many keys. What's your state of energy and state of perception? Every time you pick it up, you only see one key, but you see the ring that's there. So it's like ghost keys that are on there, and you need to manifest them out of your soul so you have access to these next layers. And the access literally comes through the music and your prayers bound as one concept.
It's wonderful what you tell me, because I can now almost like feel if this energy would come into me, and then yes, I can give it up to everybody I see without doing anything, without these people knowing what happened. That would be beautiful, to be able sort of to let this energy flow through me to others. Sort of just like this.
I'm going to tell you, the more you start to pray, with the music over your head, over your ears, you're going to connect. You got to hold on, sir. I'm still on with the other guy. You got to mute your mic. So you're still going to connect to these prayers, but as you do it more and more with conscious exploration of doing it, you're going to connect to the person that's in the temple with the other chanters, like quite literally. You're going to have this vision, but you have to build it to a crescendo. Just like every part of the music head movement, it goes to its highest point where all the orchestra comes together and everybody claps because it's perfect. That's what your soul is doing now. You're building, the orchestra of your soul is building to its crescendo, to its peak before the final movement. And your prayers need to interact with this music, so when you reach the peak, you expand beyond your physical body just enough so that you know your prayers are heard. And as the music begins to settle and it goes to the fade off, that is when your heart is going to sing back to you, and then the second part of the concert will be in your soul. And you will hear these things you are looking for. You will have the visions you're looking for, and you will understand a lot more of why this music is interacting with you in this way.
This is beautiful. Andrew, thank you so much, because yes, it's this walk to this temple. Yes, this temple is somewhere, I know, and this door will open. I'm convinced of it.
Well, I'm convinced of it too. You have all the tools. It's just a matter of you taking the time in your life so the music blends with your prayers, and I mean in a literal form.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Okay, do you have any questions?
No, there is so much you've told me that this has given me more than questions I would have had. I will try to call you maybe another time if I may, because this was extremely helpful, because I think we're all here to help each other, and you've helped me in such a beautiful way, and I've heard before how you've helped so many others in a beautiful way, and I hope that this goes on.
Oh, it will be going on. This train is getting going, and people are jumping on, and we're going to keep on moving on the Revolution Radio psychic reading train.
It's wonderful, because if you mention now the train, and I have this dream, I'm sitting in this train like everybody, and it starts to really, there is something happening, and I was told that nothing is going to happen to me, but I know that this is also a responsibility to see that there are many others that also nothing happens to them.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and to another time. I've taken so much of your time now.
I enjoy the opportunity to read you, and just to know that those tears are healing tears, my friend. Healing tears.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Thomas.
Come again and help me. Thank you.
Colin again.
Feeling is the prayer. This is what is taught in those Tibetan monasteries. The monks know it. The nuns know it. They have taught it. They have practiced it for 1,700 years. Feeling is the prayer. Now, there's a catch. Because not just any feeling creates the desired effect. Not just any feeling. Rumi has a beautiful prayer, a beautiful poem that tells us about this feeling. Rumi says to us, look at what he says. Rumi says, out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, he says, out beyond our place of judgment, of right and wrong, there's a field. Rumi even calls it a field. He said, there's a field. I will meet you there. What is this place? What is the place that Rumi talks about that is beyond right and beyond wrong? What is that place called? It's beyond judgment and ego. The place where the feelings occur that create the healing and the miracles is a place that is beyond judgment and beyond ego. It cannot happen in the mind. It must happen in our hearts. Part of my heritage is Cherokee Indian, southeastern Cherokee. And there is a word, one word, in Cherokee traditions that means single eye of the heart. The one eye of the heart that sees what is, not the judgment or the bias or the fear. That word is Shante Ishta. Shante Ishta, C-H-A-N-T-E-I-S-H-T-A, Shante Ishta. The single eye of the heart, the eye that sees what is. That is the part of you where your power lives to heal your body, to heal the bodies of others, to create peace in your world. It's in the place beyond judgment and beyond ego.